I had listened to that doctor and not come in when I thought, I would have been giving birth on the side of the highway. Hey y'all, it is Becca and I am back here today with a story time. I'm pretty much going to be talking today about my birth story. So if you don't know what's going on in the world right now, I live in Texas, and so we're still technically under a quarantine. We're not supposed to be going out, although they did open up stores, but you have to like wait in line to get into the stores. So I'm filming this on May 14th. I think it's gonna spike back up and then we're all gonna be shut down again. So we'll see. My husband did go back to work, so that's good. But pretty much that's where we are right now. So I'm just gonna be talking about how we went about going through my entire pregnancy, giving birth in quarantine, how that all happened. So me and my husband actually got married in May of 2019, and then I found out that I was pregnant in August of 2019. So I was on a work trip in Boise, Idaho, and I was a little bit worried because I was late. And I kept joking with the girls that I was with that, you know, maybe I'm pregnant, but I didn't really think anything of it. We were there for the Boise Open. We were running a booth at the Boise Open. The day that I got back from my trip, I was talking to my husband and I was like, it's been a while. Like, it's been at least 9 days and it's never really gone that long. So we took a test and found out that I was pregnant. So I went to the doctor, did all of that. We found out that I was about 9 weeks. So then I told everybody at work and they started treating me very differently. So I unfortunately just had to end up quitting that job. That is a whole nother story in itself that I'll probably share sometime soon. But yeah, I did not feel comfortable anymore working there. They were super excited at the beginning, but then they started to really just treat me different. So I just ended up quitting. And my husband was really supportive of that decision because we were in the process of selling our house and we had to do a lot to get ready for the move. So it gave me a lot more time to get that stuff done because with his job, he just wasn't able to do much. He was a tow truck driver at the time, so there was really no set schedule for him. And then we ended up finding this place, so we moved here. Which will probably be featured in some videos later on. I want to do like a house tour and things like that, but that's besides the point. And we just started preparing the house for a baby. So as I was getting near the end of my pregnancy is when the quarantine happened. And it definitely started affecting how we were planning our hospital visit. And our doctor told us that we were not going to be able to have any visitors. My husband would be the only one that would be allowed in the hospital. Now, I understand that a lot of people had it a lot harder. I'm definitely not trying to say that my situation was the worst. It definitely could have been a lot worse, but it definitely affected my first pregnancy. And when I think about it, it was really hard having to tell my family that nobody was going to be able to be in the hospital. A lot of them had a feeling that they wouldn't be allowed there, but it was still hard having to tell people, and especially my mom, because I wanted her in the room with me while I did give birth. It just ended up not being able to be that way. So I had always just pictured it like all of our family and friends in the waiting room and waiting to hear the announcement that she was born and everything. That was just how I had always pictured it. But I understand all the precautions and everything to keep everyone safe, to keep Charlie safe. It was just what we had to do. So our original due date was on April 28th, but we were having a few little issues of her not really gaining a lot of weight while she was inside. So my doctor wanted to push up the birth date to the 21st so that she could get out into the world and start eating and gaining weight. So on April 6th, we had a doctor's appointment. The doctor told us that he wanted us to schedule an appointment for the 13th in the morning. So we scheduled it for 9:30 a.m. and he was going to check her weight, and if she hadn't gained any more weight, then we would come in that night and he would induce me and either have her that night or the next day. So that's what we were planning on. But when Easter came around, April 12th, I started having what I thought were cramps. I thought that they were the Braxton Hicks contractions. So throughout the day, they started to get really strong and they were starting to get a little bit closer together, but all of the options that we were thinking were that I was going to have to be induced. So I wasn't really thinking that they were real contractions until about 10 o'clock. They were starting to get about 10 minutes apart and they were really, really strong. So I ended up actually calling my mom and asking her when is the appropriate time to go to the hospital. I was looking up on Google when you should go to the hospital. Everything was saying like 5 to 6 minutes apart is when you should probably head to the hospital, and I was only at 10 minutes apart. So I wasn't really thinking that I had to worry too bad. So my husband was playing video games and he would come in and check up on me, or I would tell him when I was having a contraction, and I started keeping track of it on my phone. And I ended up actually calling the doctor that was on call, not my doctor, but just the doctor that was on call that night. And she basically said that you don't need to come in, there's nothing to worry about, you just need to wait until they're about 3 to 5 minutes apart. So I hung up, I started crying. My husband was actually packing a bag at the time because he thought that I was really going into labor, and we really thought that the doctor was gonna say, yeah, come on, like you can come into the hospital and everything. But she didn't. She just told us to wait until they were 3 to 5 minutes apart. She didn't really seem worried, so I just started crying because I was in a lot of pain. And I called my mom and was talking to her about it, but she had never had contractions outside of the hospital. All of her pregnancies were induced, so she didn't really know what it felt like to have contractions outside of the hospital. So she was doing the best that she could, but I was actually having contractions with her while I was on the phone, and she would just be like, okay, breathe, everything's fine. And then at one point I thought that my water broke, but it didn't. You know what happened. And so I started laughing, and she just said, okay, well, I'll let you go take care of that real quick and just call me if anything else happens. So went and I changed my clothes and I ended up getting in bed and trying to sleep, but I ended up having a really, really, really bad contraction to where I started crying. I rolled off of the bed because I heard something pop. And when it popped, I ended up screaming and rolling off of the bed, and I hunched over the bed. And my husband jumped out of bed and was like, nope, I don't care what that doctor said, we are going to the hospital right now. So I started wobbling to the bathroom, and I thought my water broke again, but it didn't. So I had to change again, because you know what happened again. And I was sitting in the bathroom. My husband was starting to freak out at this point, and he was like, are you gonna go? Are you gonna go? Are we gonna get in the car? And I was like, can you give me 2 seconds to calm down, because I think this is really happening right now, and I think we waited too long and I'm scared. So he calmed down a little bit. I got myself together, I threw on some new clothes, and we threw what we had in the car. And this was at about 3 o'clock in the morning at this point. Now, I had been keeping track of the contractions on my phone, and they started at about 11 o'clock. So I had, every 10 minutes, I had an entry for when I had a contraction. And the last entry that I had before that big pop happened was at 2:54 in the morning. So this had been going on for a few hours now. So I didn't think at that point to record that last contraction because I could barely walk. So left the entry blank, but I did write down the time. And by 3 o'clock in the morning, we were on our way to the hospital. I sent a text message to my dad at 3:02, and we were in the car headed to the hospital. So while we were on our way to the hospital, I was yelling out the times that my contractions got really bad, because at that point, it wasn't even just one contraction at a time. It felt like one long contraction with like peaks of how bad it would get. We live in Justin, Texas, and the hospital that we were supposed to be giving birth in was in Grapevine. So it took about 30 minutes sometimes to get there. But we ended up getting there in about 15 minutes, which to me felt like forever because I was having contractions at that point at every 2 minutes. Almost ran a red light, but our luck, something bad would have happened. So he ended up stopping at a red light. I don't even remember that because I was just too focused on trying not to have a baby in the car. We didn't think to go to the emergency room, but I'm glad we didn't go. With the virus going around, who really knows what is going on in the emergency room? So we ended up just going to the labor and delivery area where we were told to go anyways. While we were waiting for somebody to come down and get us, a security guard actually drove up and walked up to us and asked us if we needed any help or if somebody was coming to help us. But at that time, somebody had come down and let us in. They had to check our temperature, and then they were asking us, and she was asking us a whole bunch of questions about if we have left the country, if we've been on a cruise, and I'm like hunched over walking, and I'm like, no, we haven't been anywhere. I think this baby is coming out of me. Like, we need to get upstairs right now. So we had to ride up in the elevator to the delivery floor where they started asking me a whole bunch of questions, which I don't remember. Lewis told me that he answered pretty much all of the questions, and I gave him medical consent if anything went wrong, which I don't remember, but I would have anyway because he's my husband. But I just don't remember that conversation. I was leaned over the counter and I was in a lot of pain, so I was not paying attention to anything that anybody was saying to me. So they took me to a checkup room because they had to make sure that I was actually in labor, or else they were going to have to send me home, because I did tell them on the phone that my contractions were 10 minutes apart, although in the car they started to get 2 minutes apart. So they went from 10 minutes to 2 minutes. There was no in between. So I knew that there was something going on, but they still had to check. So they took me to the checkup room, and she asked right then if I wanted an epidural, if I was actually going to be in labor right then, so that they could start that process when I got up into the delivery room. She gave me a gown. It took forever for me to figure out how to get that gown on. And then she checked to see if I was dilated, and that is when she told me I was 7 centimeters dilated and I was being admitted right away. So they took me up into the delivery room, started trying to put an IV in me and get me ready for my epidural. But when they checked me again, they realized that I was already 10 centimeters. So from the time that I got up out of the bed in the checkup room to when I walked down the hall to the delivery room, laid down, and was checked again, I was 10 centimeters dilated. There at that point was no time for an epidural and really no time for anything.
So like I said, they were trying to put IVs in me, but they were trying 4 different veins on both of my arms, and I ended up knocking out the last one while I was holding on to the bed rail, and I ended up bleeding everywhere.
They ended up having to call my doctor twice because they called him when they found out that I was 7 centimeters, and he got up and was getting ready to come in, but he still thought he had a little bit of time. But in, the few minutes that it took for me to get to the delivery room and I was 10 centimeters, they had to call again and be like, you need to get here right now because she's about to have this baby. But they put on the thing that tracks your contractions. I don't know the medical word for it. They put that on, and then they were trying to give me IVs. They obviously told me that I would not have any epidural, and that is when I started freaking out and crying because I was already in a lot of pain. I was not expecting this to happen so soon. I at least thought that I had until that doctor's appointment in the morning, and then they would tell me whether or not I was gonna have the baby the next day. So I was freaking out, I was in pain, and everything was just happening super fast. So then they started obviously tracking my contractions, and they would tell me when I was having one, but I could feel everything. And then the nurses started telling me to try not to push. How? Without getting into the graphics of it, there was no way my body was not letting me push. So I understand what they were trying to do. They were trying to wait for the doctor, which he was on his way when he got the second call. But at that point, I was not in control of anything that was happening. So Lewis did not tell me this at the time because I was not paying attention and I was obviously going through a lot. But he told me afterwards that the nurses, while they were waiting for the doctor to get there, were whispering about who was about to deliver the baby because the doctor might not get there in time. So at about 4:30 in the morning, my doctor showed up, which was only about 10 to 15 minutes after he was called. He lived in Grapevine, and that's what all the nurses were saying. So they were saying that I was really lucky that I had the doctor that I had because he lived in Grapevine and he could be there in no time. So we were really lucky in that aspect. So he got there at about 4:20, 4:30, something like that. And he just swooped in. The room was already prepared. All he had to do was swoop in, put on his gown, and he slid over to me and said, "You can start pushing." So my delivery lasted about 20 minutes, but honestly, it felt like it was hours. And I did stop a few times saying that I can't do this because I was in so much pain. And I was still really stressed out that everything was just happening so fast. I honestly couldn't comprehend what was going on at the time. So for about 20 minutes, I pushed, and she entered the world at 4:51 in the morning on April 13th. So afterwards, I got to hold her for a few minutes before they took her off to get her all cleaned up and everything. Lewis started calling and texting everybody, telling them that she was here, and was starting to send pictures. So we started getting a lot of phone calls, a lot of text messages. I actually ended up waking up my best friend at about 6 o'clock in the morning to a FaceTime of Charlotte, because we honestly didn't get to tell everyone that we were on our way to the hospital because it was 3 o'clock in the morning. For the most part, everybody was surprised that she came at that time. My sisters were still asleep, so we did send them pictures, and my mom was trying to get a hold of them, but I don't blame anyone because it was so early. My parents and his parents were the only ones who knew that we were headed to the hospital and in the hospital, and then gave birth when we did. So not a lot of people knew until about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, when people started waking up and saw the posts and everything. So we decided it'd be a fun surprise for everybody to wake up to. So while we were waiting to get sent up to our permanent room, our nurses kept coming in and talking to us, checking on us and everything. And one of the things that one of them mentioned was that if I had listened to that doctor and not come in when I thought, I would have been giving birth on the side of the highway. So I am glad that we decided to leave when we did, because from 3 a.m. to 4:51 a.m. is not a lot of time, and if I would have waited even one more hour, we definitely would have stuck on the side of the highway or calling for an ambulance from the house. So I am so glad that we decided to leave when we did. And then they were having a shift change at around 7 o'clock in the morning, so we waited in the delivery room until about 7 o'clock, and they took us to our permanent room where we finally got to eat some breakfast and try and get some sleep, because we had been up at that point for over 24 hours. We were up at about 9 o'clock in the morning the day before. Then we had Easter plans with our families. Then we went home. I tried to take a nap, but it didn't work because I was in a lot of pain. He was playing video games. I started counting my contractions at 11 o'clock that night. We ended up headed to the hospital at 3 a.m. And then I delivered at 4:51 in the morning. Didn't get to our permanent room until about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning that day. So we had been up for over 24 hours. But you don't sleep in a hospital at all. You don't get any sleep. They were coming in every 2 hours, doing their job, totally understand, but they were coming in at like every 2 hours, checking on me, checking on her, giving me pain medicine. So I finally got pain medicine at 8 o'clock in the morning when we were eating breakfast. So that was fun, going that long without it. Our doctor came in later that morning to check on us, and he told us that with everything going on, he understood if we didn't want to stay in the hospital for the recommended amount of time and that we could leave at any point. He just suggested that we stayed there that day, and then we could decide if we wanted to leave the next day or not. So we ended up leaving the hospital at 11 a.m. on the 14th, so the day afterwards. And then we slept for the entire day because we hadn't gotten any sleep. So that is pretty much how everything went. We had a very, very crazy journey of pregnancy, me and my husband both, and then just cherry on top of everything was being pregnant in quarantine and giving birth in quarantine. It was definitely quite an adventure, definitely a story that we will remember forever. So that is all for my crazy birth story time and having to deliver in quarantine and almost not making it to the hospital. So listen to your body. Don't listen to the doctors if you think that there's something wrong. It is always better to be safe than sorry. And if you hear a big pop, probably because your baby has dropped and is ready to come out and you need to go to the hospital right away. So if you like this story, please like and comment. You can definitely leave me a comment if you shared the same experience as me and had a baby during this crazy time, because we are all in this together. Hopefully this will all be over soon and we can get back to a semi-normal lifestyle. Continue to wash your hands, wear a mask if you want. So I'd also like to mention that I have an affiliate link with an online boutique called XOmandysue. The information will be in the description below, but you can use the code Becca35OFF for 35% off of any purchase. I actually just ordered some new stuff, so I'm super excited for it to come in and show you guys. So if you want to support a small business and support me, so you should definitely go check them out, and I'll see you in my next video.